We are live. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to UnSpun episode number 62. Today we're joined by Jasun Horsley, as well as my infamous co-host,
Let's
Joe
suppose that
Atwill.
you're writing a really important
And
email to a
boy,
colleague.
the sound just kicked off there. Get rid of that. And boy, do we have an interesting show tonight. It's really going to just launch off from where we left last week's show, but it's going to go far, far deeper than last week's show. And Jason's got a wealth of information. He's been writing some articles and books and doing a podcast on his own life experience. Jason is actually a member, or former member, I guess you might say, of the British elite, and grew up in all of the elite circles in England. And he's distanced himself from all of that and moved a continent away. And so, Jason, we're happy to have you on tonight. And it looks like I think we're going to have you on next week as well. Is that correct?
I guess we'll see how it goes. If we've still got, gold to mine, then I'd be happy to. Excuse me.
Well, I wanted to start out, Jason. First of all, you had sent us a paper, which I don't believe is currently for public consumption. Is that correct?
Well, Occult Yorkshire is serialized at the blog, but I also made it a PDF for people who just wanted to read it all in one go.
Well, I just really want to recommend every single viewer go and find a copy of it and read it. I thought it was one of the most important treasure troughs of primary evidence, which in some cases is just revolutionary, and in other cases is corroborative. But anyway, you really have woven together a lot of facts and personalities, and have kind of come very close to illuminating the conspiracy that existed in Britain, in my opinion. I don't want to put words in your mouth, because I know you have a very particular way of characterizing your work in regards to conspiracy, but I do want to start out by asking you to, what would you say to someone who is coming to your work fresh, who hadn't had a lot of background? I mean, can you help us, take someone through the beginning of knowing about you, your life, and why you've done the work, and then a little bit enough about the work so that it would be easy for someone to get into it as they're a reader?
Yeah, I can try that.
Sorry, it's such a broad question.
Yeah, it is. It's a tough one to answer, but you put it in quite a good context, which is like how I came to it. So one of the things that I do refer to, and even people who haven't read me for long, they will pick up on it as they go through my current stuff, is that I was entirely separate from being raised in a kind of aristocracy, which I wasn't really even aware of at the time. I mean, we didn't think of ourselves as aristocrats; we were socialists. So there's that. But even separate from that, like my interests as a young man were all into conspiracies and UFOs and occultism, and I went into it pretty much blind. And I coined a term in the last few years, which is the second matrix. And the reason I coined it was that's how I look at those years now that I spent investigating this stuff in a very naive fashion. I'm sure Jan can relate, because I think, I drank the Kool-Aid, and I really just became so identified with all that symbolism, and I thought I was a shaman and so on. But I also did a lot of what I thought was deep conspiracy research, and I wrote a couple of books about it as this Aeolus Cephas pseudonym. And they're books that I kind of almost want to disown at this point, except that they are useful to show my own curve, my own journey in terms of getting lured into this crystal maze of imagery and symbolism and all the enticements, without really suspecting the kind of values and the kind of ideology that I was being having installed into me. So all of that changed, I would say, around the time I turned 40. which is the time I moved to Canada and I met my wife. And shortly after that, my brother died. It's my brother Sabastian Horsley, and he died of a heroin overdose, but under somewhat.
And your brother was actually one of the most famous drug addicts in England, wasn't he?
I think that's a good way of putting it. Yeah, he was on the top 10 time out list of celebrity drug addicts. So as a celebrity, he was pretty far down the scale, but as a celebrity drug user, yeah, he was near the top, and that was partly because he used his licentious lifestyle as a kind of currency and as a kind of way to spice up his work, which otherwise was perhaps not so interesting, like as a painter.
What made him a celebrity?
I think it was mostly his lifestyle. He was a dandy, and he had a philosophy that went along with this identification as a dandy, which I looked into with occult Yorkshire. It's actually a tradition that goes quite far back and that does intersect with some of the social engineering programs that we've all been investigating here. And so part of the philosophy was a licentious lifestyle. So he went to prostitutes constantly. He himself was a male prostitute. His drug use was prodigious, and so on and so forth. And so he glamorized all those things while also putting them in the context of a nihilistic belief system.
But why was he promoted? I mean, who was advertising this? What sort of media was representing him to culture?
Well, it was actually pretty mainstream. I mean, that in retrospect, that was one of the clues, but I certainly didn't think about it at the time. He wrote for the New Statesman for a little while, which is a Fabian publication. He wrote for the Observer, which is the Guardian. It's the same corporation as the Guardian. He had various different outlets, so he was definitely being promoted. And I think it was like the main thing that put him on the map was his crucifixion. Like he went to the Philippines. He got crucified, he filmed it, he fell off the cross and passed out during the crucifixion. And then he did a series of paintings and he had an exhibition and he showed the film of the crucifixion, and that caused quite a sensation, I think.
Good God, I can imagine.
Yeah.
Jason, I wanted to ask you if you would mind just giving us a brief overview of your upbringing, your family background, who your grandfather was, the ties to the Fabians, that sort of thing.
Right. Yeah, well, a lot of this stuff I didn't even know until recently, which is funny. And it's like the fish doesn't know that he's swimming in water. He doesn't recognize what has always been around him. So I wasn't even that curious until recently. But my grandfather, because I didn't really know him. I mean, I would see him once a week, and he would give me money and chocolate, and that was about it as far as what I can remember, what he meant to me. But I was aware that he was very politically minded. He advocated socialism. He was involved in the CND, the Campaign for Nuclear Disarmament, which, he was very deeply involved. Like he was one of the founding members and the very famous peace symbol, apparently, according to other family members, he helped with the design of that. So he was definitely...
Which is a rune and basically an upside-down broken cross.
Yeah, I think it's an upside-down rune for protection, now that I think about it. That three-pointed thing.
Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
So, that I knew about. I knew about his involvement in the CND, because actually that's a kind of anecdote. That is an anecdote that I can share, which is that I used to wear the CND badge once a week, which is when we'd go to see our grandfather, because whenever he saw me wearing it, he would give me £1. Mm-hmm. So I learned very early on that if I wear the badge of a peacemonger, then I'll get, monetary rewards, which in retrospect kind of is quite symbolic of how cynical my grandfather was in certain ways. But his other involvements, like with the Fabians. See, the reason I started investigating my grandfather was that I was trying to understand better how and why my brother died. you know, and I knew that his life and his choices and his values and his ideology and his philosophy and all that had led to his death one way or another. And I also knew that there was a really deep, dark, hidden aspect to all of that. And the key event, I mean, the key encounter in my brother's life was meeting Jimmy Boyle, who was a notorious Glaswegian collector for the Glasgow mob. Like one of the nastiest pieces of work you can imagine. He's the guy who goes and knocks on people's doors who hasn't paid the money and terrifies them, you know, sufficiently that they will pay the money, or if it's beyond that, he'll just, you know, he would just kill them. So, an enforcer, I guess, is another word for it. And he got involved with my brother when my brother was very young. They went into business together. It was this drug rehabilitation centre in Edinburgh called the Gateway Exchange, which attracted quite a few celebrities like Billy Connolly and Sean Connery, and supporting it. It was supposedly a halfway house for drug addicts. So my brother got involved with Jimmy Boyle. They were sexually involved. He writes about it in his memoir. And looking back over my brother's life, it was clear that a lot changed for him during that period. So it was very clear that his relationship with Jimmy Boyle had been critical in some way. So the fact that my grandfather introduced my brother to Jimmy Boyle, because my grandfather, among other things he did, was he was interested in criminals, rehabilitating criminals. So he would visit prisons and he would, whatever. I mean, like the small amount of information I was able to gather from him about him, for example, is in a short memoir that he wrote for a book of poems by a convicted rapist. So apparently he just had this very liberal kind of social conscience thing where he wanted to help criminals to reform, and Jimmy Boyle was one of those causes. But Jimmy Boyle was also a celebrity. Like, he'd written this book, Sense of Freedom. They'd made a film about him, directed by John Mackenzie, the BBC. And so he was a celebrity, and my grandfather was very into celebrities. So he helped Jimmy Boyle get released from jail early, to get parole. And then he introduced Jimmy Boyle to my brother. And then that was how that happened, you know, whatever. My brother got involved with. Like Jimmy Boyle was also supposedly under the protection of the Cray twins in London shortly before he ended up in jail. And the Cray twins, if you just do half an hour's research into them, they're very, very central to the kind of networks that I describe in Occult Yorkshire that connect Jimmy Savile to the political establishment and to the criminal underworld.
I hate to interrupt, but there's just so much material to dive into. Could you give, I mean, a lot of people are interested in Jimmy Savile, and you had...
I was just going to bring that up too. Thanks, Joe.
You had such extraordinary direct information about him. Could you give just a summary of your family's relationship to Jimmy, all the different...
Yeah, well, I wouldn't put it that broadly. I mean, some people might say I was clutching at straws. I'm sure my family would, but because it's not as though I can place them in the same room together, much less at, child brothels or anything like that. But that he was a Yorkshire man, and Northern Foods funded his charity run from Land's End to John Noakes.
Right, and Northern Foods is related to your family, how?
Northern Foods is the business that my grandfather started as Northern Dairies. And you're right, there is so much to get into, and one thing leads to another, and it's really hard to stay on track here.
Well, you wrote, 80, almost 90 pages just breaking down some of the history, and that wasn't even the start of it.
Well, right, that was the start of it, and as you know from what you've read, it like one lead leads to another, and it just keeps, and in your own research, as you found the same thing, it just keeps expanding. So the trick is to stay on track and not get distracted by too many, to try and cover everything.
There's so many rabbit holes to go down, and you have to be selective in which ones you want to chase down.
Yeah, and what I found that was very helpful for me with my approach was that the main focus was my own personal history. So tantalizing as one thread or another might be, I would always try and bring it back to my grandfather or my brother, more often my grandfather. And that was the ground, because as long as I could keep bringing it back to direct personal experience, then it was like I could test it. So that helped me to, stay on track. And then, of course, finding out about my own history was endlessly interesting and helpful in terms of understanding my own conditioning. But anyway, bringing it back to Alec, he started a dairy that was Northern Dairies. Supposedly,
Alec being your grandfather.
Alec Horsley, my paternal grandfather. Supposedly he came from poor stock and worked his way up, but even there's some reason to question it, because he was born in a town called Ripley, and right near that town there's a town called Horsley. Well, is that a coincidence? And if it's not a coincidence,
not too many people have a town named after them. I mean, that would be quite the coincidence.
Yeah, or are named after a town, right? And it turns out, in fact, that his father sometimes drove a Rolls Royce. So sometimes he was apparently poor, and sometimes he was rich. So
right, and he ended up in Oxford, right?
But my grandfather ended up in Oxford. Yeah. That's right.
Right.
And from Oxford, he went to Nigeria as the district officer in Nigeria for the British Empire. So, this is not some working class kid who just made it good in a period of several years. Seems highly unlikely. And then from there, he started the business that was Northern Dairy. So we were led to understand that it started very, very small grassroots as, just a milk cart kind of thing, and built its way up. I don't know. It just seems unlikely. But one thing that I do know is that my grandfather built it up to the largest dairy in the county, which is Yorkshire, and that my grandfather took over, I actually forget the years, but sometime in the mid-60s, and that he turned it into Northern Foods, which became the largest food corporation in Europe. My grandfather was very, very well connected, is the other thing that's very interesting. And the Fabian thing, this is an example of following the leads in my own history and finding myself ending up in conspiracy theory central. Like I didn't have a particular interest in the Fabian stuff. I'd heard of them, but it was when I discovered that my grandfather was a founding member of the Fabian Society in Hull that I thought, well, I should look into the Fabian Society. And as you know, that's an enormous can of worms. Like the Fabian Society are enormously influential. They created the Labour Party, which is one of the two main political parties in England. So, even just starting with that one fact indicates how influential they are. But if you dig deeper into the Fabian Society, their influence is prodigious, and it crosses the Atlantic. I mean, it can be seen in the US education system, and even Karl Marx seems like he was influenced by the Fabians, and probably directly connected to them. The main Fabians are George Bernard Shaw, Sidney and Beatrice Webb. Those are the two main ones. I'm trying to think. H.G. Wells was in there for a little while, but he left. He abandoned them.
And Jason, was your grandfather was a oops, I'm spelling it incorrectly. Your grandfather was a key founder of the Fabian Society, was he not?
Well, so it's like a local thing. He was also sheriff of Hull, which I found is quite an interesting office, which is worth looking into, because currently Peter Mandelson, or maybe not currently, but Peter Mandelson, who's quite notorious in UK politics, was the sheriff of Hull. Now, what does the sheriff of Hull do? I don't even know. It's just one of those weird offices which seem to get granted to people with hidden power and influence, is my guess about that. And as far as him founding the Fabian Society in Hull, I don't even know exactly what that means, except that it means he was a Fabian, right? And he was obviously a very useful Fabian because he created a hub in his own particular area. As far as what they did, that's really difficult to say. I mean, this is the funny thing is that I can look at what my grandfather was involved in and the names and the places and the dates, and then I can follow that to the larger historical context and what the Fabian Society were up to and see how pervasive and how dark and how sinister a lot of it is. But I can't actually place my grandfather in any of that because seems like he was a relatively small fry, player. So it leaves me with this constant question: how witting was he? How much did he know about what he was involved in?
Have you tried to talk to your family about this? Or are you estranged from your family for talking about this?
I was never really not estranged from my family, not counting very close like mother and siblings. But uncles and aunts, I was always estranged from them. Like our family was never that kind of family that was much in touch. But they did become aware of what I was doing and were not happy about it. That much I was able to ascertain. And I've tried to get some sort of comment or some sort of anything at all, but I haven't tried that hard because, nobody likes being lied to. So I know that they're not going to own up to it. I did. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, they probably can't, and for one reason or another, they may not know, or they were sworn by oath to keep things quiet.
Yeah.
The thing that pops out to me when I was reading, the paper you wrote was that it's a very good circumstantial case for the existence of a secret society. There had to have been some organizing principle in back of all of the circumstantial connections that you've shown and all of the relationships between these disparate events and then world politics. I mean, I think that you could almost take your paper and then just say, okay, there has to be some secret society organizing this, and just submit it as is. It just pops right out. Mm-hmm. But the fact is that the society is successful in its secrecy. And so we will, I think, it's very unlikely that we'll ever breach habeas corpus. We're not going to find, a document. I don't think they use written documents. We're not going to find a body. I mean, they typically control the police investigations. So that isn't, something we can look forward to. Like, for example, in this Pizzagate business that's going on in the US, I think it's very unlikely you're ever going to find any body of someone who's been defiled. I think it's that stuff is all handled, and so we have what we're left with is circumstantial evidence and analytic evidence. We can analyze backwards from powerful cultural events, powerful cultural organizations, and show connections between them. Like Tavistock. Mm-hmm. You brought quite a bit of information to me that I was unaware about Tavistock. You were citing sources, but just the way you were able to kind of weave it all together, I was well illuminated by what you were saying. I really learned a lot. And then when you look to the Cultural Revolution in the United States, and you see that Alan Trist shows up as the handler of the Grateful Dead. He's basically, even before it's the Grateful Dead, he's there with Jerry Garcia, and he's obviously bringing with him the kind of understanding of how to move culture that was being developed by that organization and even by its predecessor organizations, which I didn't even know, it had that trajectory. But the thing is that when you look at the mass observation science that was being, created in Britain, and then try to and then just follow the history of it and how it relates into these other organizations, man, I think you could really see how they were studying, dance and nightclubs and these kinds of things with the idea of how they were going to use rhythm and blues bands to be able to sway, to control culture.
Yeah.
It just seems really clear. And I had never heard of the mass observation science, the organization that Britain had developed. Would it be too much trouble to segue for a second and just give the readers an understanding of what that was? Because I was just astounded by it.
Yeah, well, me too. I'd never heard of them, and they're really not a well-known thing. And the thing about mass observation is it's very much in the common stream of history. I mean, there's nothing conspiracy theoretical about them. And they don't have the earmarks of a sort of shadowy organization. They were doing this stuff very much in the public eye, and it also has this weird kind of grassroots feel about it. When you look at it, it seems like it was just a few people. Unfortunately, I'm not, like I say, I don't have this information at my fingertips. I can't name names. I think Madge was one of these guys, and they were also connected to my grandfather's circle, which is partly how I stumbled upon them, but not entirely. William Epson, I think, was a part. But anyway, they seem like artists and art critics, and just not exactly regular people, but people who we wouldn't associate with espionage, let's say. But the agenda of mass observation obviously speaks for itself. It was about actually taking sort of on-the-ground surveys about British society at every level. So infiltrating society.
When did it begin?
Like I said, I'm terrible with these facts. I think it was, I'm hoping you guys have read it more recently than I have. Was it the 30s? We're talking about the 30s, I think.
Yeah.
Because I know that, I mean...
Jason suffers the syndrome that many of us authors suffer, is once you write something, you forget what you've written.
Yeah, it's a necessary whatever, just to make room for the next stuff and not to go crazy. But I mean, the shape of it stays there. So, and the really sort of meaty parts, like Joe was referring to, the dance halls. I mean, that was one of the things that really got my eye.
Yeah.
Because that overlaps so much with Jimmy Savile, who got his start in the dance clubs. He supposedly was the first ever, double turntable DJ, like he invented the double turntable. So discovering that there was actually a agenda, I was going to try and put an adjective on it, but what we're talking about is sort of a military intelligence agenda to create dance clubs and use them as part of this mass observation, or at least applying what they discovered through mass observation about people, what they wanted, but also in order to be able to facilitate mass observation, you create venues where people will go to so you can see how they behave. It's one of the things that's confusing about this stuff is you find that this sort of social engineering, that there's a kind of intelligence and cunning that is very deep and very multi-leveled. So many of the things, the programs that are created, they have multiple purposes. So it's never enough to say, well, the dance halls were created so that they could get people to dance to patriotic songs, and so build up fervor for the war effort. Well, that was part of it. They were also created so they could sell drugs. They were also created so they could encourage, free sexuality and whatnot, and so on and so forth. There's probably dozens of different agendas that were being served by creating these dance halls. So you don't want to reduce.
Let me just interject. Steve Outram is in the audience watching. The extended version of the dance halls is Burning Man. Project that forward, and you have this massive operation. Sorry, go ahead.
Right. So
I hope that Steve can join us next week.
Yeah, Steve, you're joining us next week, right?
I would love to have
Daddy Boy.
Steve and Jason have a conversation. It'd be fascinating.
Yeah, I listened to those Burning Man things. So yeah, and
we were going to record the last part of the Burning Man series on Friday, but hopefully we'll get it recorded real soon.
Okay, I just wanted to read something because this was from your document, and I had read it, and I just wanted, because I think this will help flesh it out. First of all, that so mass observation begins in the 30s, and its background includes individuals like Humphrey Jennings, who founded the Cambridge Literary Periodical Experiment.
Right.
Okay, and then Jacob Bronkowski. Now, I'm pretty sure that's the individual who wrote The Ascent of Man.
That's that guy, and he's a friend of my grandfather's, because my grandfather wants us.
So you've got really influential and powerful social observers and anthropologists. This isn't some grassroots, let's kind of figure out what we're all about society. I mean, this is basically just from the very, very top, looking down, analyzing science. And it's also, they have Epson, who was part of the filmmaking propaganda arm of the Ministry of Information. So if you just look at the characters who are leading up to the existence of mass observation, the claim that this is some kind of indigenous social movement is just preposterous. And I wanted to just read this. This is actually an excerpt from Mass Observation in Britain in the 30s, A Brief History, which you cite in your paper. And it is that the range of mass observers' interests, from the behavior of people at war memorials, the Astrata cult, and anthropology of football pools, to bathroom behavior, beards, armpits, and eyebrows, and the distribution, diffusion, and significance of dirty jokes, was intended to form a comprehensive topography of workers' lives, and in so doing, provide a new basis for social democracy. You see, here is where the rubber hits the road. Now, when you plug in Jennings and Bronkowski, and you're saying, "Oh, we're looking for a new basis for social democracy," this is just preposterous sophistry. They're looking for a new basis for social control, right? That's why, and later on you'll start to link some of the stuff into Tavistock, because this is really what's going on. This mass observation, which I had no idea even existed, called MO, and it's among the many, many things that Jason's paper brings to light that was new to me. This I think is actually a kind of a precursor to a lot of, what you think about of the MK Ultra social programs and, the sex, drugs, and rock and roll. So it's a really important find, the way you put it in the context you have, and want to thank you for doing it. So anyway, they're providing a new basis for social democracy. And then what happens to MO?
Is that a question?
Yeah, I'm just curious. I mean, it goes forward in your paper, and they just talk about, how it begins to have an influence on American education.
Oh, good. Well, maybe you can remind me, because it's one of those things.
No, well, it just, that's it's just that the idea that the workers struggle, they're presenting this thing in the context of like socialism, the workers' needs, the idea of educating a mass populace, which was the ostensible goal, educating, but then you actually say, well, actually, this is doublespeak for making sure they don't educate and empower themselves. Because then when you look at people who are influenced by it, like John Taylor Gatto, you get statements like, or at least as he analyzed it, forced schooling comes of it. And this is the idea of turning, the individuals,
social conditioning through
conditioning and mass production of very narrowly defined individuals
through compulsory education, right?
Right, compulsory education. And so it looks like what they did was they studied, basically how to unify. I mean, this is what I think is going on here. They're actually trying to learn, first of all, well, of course, where are the levers of control? But then they're trying to go for, well, how can we unify a class of people? I'm wondering if MO wasn't really the beginning of the whole counterculture. because in a way it's really like the furthest back point of like the kind of social observation I've ever seen. It certainly was one of the influence things, certainly the Macy. I'm going to try to do some research in this and see how these individuals and these ideas end up in the Macy, because this is one of the strands, I think, that ends up with the government using this kind of science against the public in a way to create these easily to control stereotypic individuals.
Yeah, well, you could trace it further back, as I did, to Trotter, Wilfred Trotter and Wilfred Bryan, and that early research, psychosexual research, that is definitely tied to the Fabian Society and just the various different groups and agendas that I try and explore.
Right.
There seems to be a common theme and common sort of values on practices and whatnot that are being promoted, that I know you and Jan have been looking into too, like vegetarianism was a common thread there, sort of natural religion, natural worship, early sexual education,
and sexual involvement, for that matter.
And sexual involvement, and often centering around just education in general, based on these principles of crowd control or social psychology that were being explored very early on as directly relating to human sexuality. So I think you could see that mass observation was maybe when they were starting to implement it on a larger scale.
Well, but they're developing the science. I mean, like in 1940, there was that memorandum for propaganda that Zuckerman, cited to Julian Huxley, which he actually talks about. He says that, I'm quoting, he says, "I wonder if it'd be worth trying to convert any of these ideas to our ideas and try to get them to express themselves in dance tunes."
Right.
Imagine, for example, an immense popularity of something with the refrain of, "When are they going to let us build a better world?" My God.
The Brave New World. And that's right into that goes.
This is incredible. I mean, this is the bloody counterculture,
and that goes right into Steve's work and the Grateful Dead and everything.
Right now, and then it goes on, and this is Julian. Julian, stop me from quoting you, but I'm getting excited. I think this is such good research. It goes. So mass observation interest in dance clubs is so extensive that a 375-page study of dance culture on the Dance Nation, Culture and Popular Dancing in Britain, 1918-1945. It cited mass observation findings 85 times. Mm-hmm. Think about that. Okay, this is Bronkowski. This is the social engineering guy who's studying the dance halls. When they come up with the idea for a song, he goes, "Gee, think of how popular the refrain of 'When are they going to let us build a better world?' Look how sinister this science is. This ability to manipulate people. The peace sign, all of this stuff. This is how they create cults and basically put people into little cul-de-sacs so they can basically control them. But I just think this is just fascinating to see it going on in Britain in the 30s and 40s like this.
Before you go on that, we only have about 20 minutes left, and I do want you to cover Joe's statement, but we also need to get into the Urania cult.
Right. Sorry. Yeah, let's go on to the Urania cult, because I know you wanted to talk about that, Jason. I didn't mean to.
It's actually key to all of this because it's foundational, historically speaking, and then it really pulls all of this, the pedophilia, the trans QWERTY agenda, etc., forward.
Right. So how do you want to approach it then?
Well, let's talk about okay. So from your research, where did the Urania cult originate? Who are some of the key players? And let's talk about this third sex idea that they are forcing into society right now as this transgender, Bruce gender, etc.
Right. Well, I was trying to actually find the article because I have to refer to it myself. This is because it's the example of something that I just found out about, on my way somewhere else. I'm like, oh, well, these guys are interesting. And I did just read over it. So I know that it tied into this, what I was talking about with Joe a moment ago, this Society for Sexual Research. So, but the actual organization themselves would seem to be more of a supposedly artistic or literary, slightly occultist kind of society. The ostensible purpose of it was for homosexuals to be able to communicate safely, because homosexuality was illegal at that time. So it has, like many of these different groups and agendas, it has this ostensibly benign purpose and, fairly simple.
Did that include pedophilia as well?
Well, I don't know if it specifically did. I mean, obviously in my article, I'm drawing these overlaps between, different philosophies and even different groups. So if we flash forward to the 70s, we've got the pedophile information exchange really did, develop very naturally and organically out of gay rights. But we're talking about the order of Chaldrea, or however you pronounce it. This was well before that, right?
Right.
So that's a big question mark, isn't it?
Well, it seems to me that with the Urania cult, and I'm just pulling up my database here, that they were influenced by Isis, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and it's like an amalgamation of, it's like where we get hermaphrodite from, which is Hermes and Aphrodite. And so, it's this amalgamated figure that then is used from ancient Greece, and evidence apparently shows that pedophilia wasn't as rampant in ancient Greece, etc., as we've been told, but that these ideas have taken hold from that, and then they recreate these societies in the late 1800s, early 1900s in England, and then that feeds into the Fabian Society, etc. That and then into Tavistock, and then into the Grateful Dead, and then from there into SRI, the whole promotion of the counterculture, and then the transgender agenda, Peter Lamborn Wilson's promotion, and NAMBLA. And all of this stuff seems to feed off of all of these connections. They're loose connections right now, but what I see in your paper is really the core foundation, speculatively speaking, of this whole movement. And it's, ironically centered, partly around your family, and you've been really the one who's made the pictures so much clearer with the historical information on the origins of this, because we've focused primarily on SRI and the CIA and Tavistock and the Fabian socialists, etc. And let me ask you also: are you aware if Aldous Huxley was a member of the Urania cult?
I don't know about that. I don't think he was. I know he was very close to the various groups that my grandfather was involved in, like Committee of 100 and so on, in terms of it's an interesting area of overlap between the socialist leftist reform and the sexual liberation. Like they clearly intersect and overlap. Right?
Now, if the elites are all involved in all of this pedophilia and these sex cults, and if they liberalize everything to get everybody to accept pedophilia and all of this hideous behavior, doesn't that disempower them in the long run?
Yeah, I know. That's a big question, isn't it? Because, part of the potency of these agendas is the use for blackmail. Is if they can implicate the people they want to control in these activities, then they can blackmail them. So if it was all normalized, then that would neutralize that. But I think that they're constantly evolving. One thing I wanted to, the agendas, not the individuals, but one of the things I wanted to sort of zero in on as we're running out of time is the different levels here. Like, so specifically, as I was saying earlier, it's impossible for me to know like how much my grandfather was consciously complicit with some of this stuff and how much he was simply a dupe. And this is like in just about everything we look at, we see that there is individuals and these philosophies that at first glance seem quite benign, and they seem positive, and they seem all about making the world a better place, in quotes, right? That's always the agenda, and sometimes it seems convincing. But then when we look deeper, and one of my
the road to hell is paved with good intentions, apparently.
Totally,
but you know, socialists are kind of, I don't know. I don't want to use the word demented, but if the shoe fits.
Well, I think any strong drive to make the world a better place, or change, or control, I think it always has these pathological drives behind it. Personally, that's my view. But I tried to show that in a very sort of acute or irrefutable way by linking wherever I could to Jimmy Savile, like, all roads lead to Jimmy Savile. If I could show how these groups and these agendas include somebody like Jimmy Savile, and supporting him and protecting him, and advocating his activities, then that throws any kind of cover story or rationale into complete disarray. Like how far out do you have to go to believe that the end justifies the means when you allow that the means include the kind of behaviors that Jimmy Savile was involved in? You have to go really far out, which is one of the reasons that I ended up looking at Crowley, because Crowley, you can find in his work the basic rationale for anything, for any kind of human depravity. It's part of the program, it's part of the methodology that Crowley was advocating and practicing. And I think that we're seeing this on
and we shouldn't forget that he was MI6 and advocating it for MI6, and
right.
then at the Esopus Island, creating the intelligence community in the United States, amalgamating the OTO and everything, and combining all of these into the CIA. So Crowley's got that direct connection with the U.S. intelligence as well.
Absolutely, and that was the thing I was trying to get to, was that, like, behind the groups and the cover stories and all of that, there are these agendas that are sort of somewhat grey, but even behind the agendas, there are these philosophies and these principles that are being applied. And so my sense, and what I was trying to uncover with Occult Yorkshire, is if you dig deep enough, you'll get to these philosophies or these belief systems that predate the agendas that are hidden behind the groups and all the rest of it, and they make sense of a lot of it. Like, it's all like, you can never find a single group of individuals or a single agenda. There's just so many different heads to the Hydra. But I think it's possible to identify and to some extent, unpack the philosophies and the belief system and the goals that are consistent throughout these historical movements that you've been mapping, that I've been mapping, in different parts of the world. And it's like they seem to be operating at a very different level. Like, I don't know what we're going to say. Like, we could say that we can't just say they're just insane, right? They have a very long-term goal, and they have an understanding of these very deep psychological principles that they're applying. And then they come up with whatever kinds of beliefs and values and agendas and groups and cultural movements and what have you, that will serve as vehicles to actually, push these deeper agendas over a long period of time. And then, so it's kind of like, most of the time we're just seeing the effects, is what I'm trying to get at.
Right, exactly. We're seeing the aftermath of it.
Yeah, and I would just say that's an excellent analytic approach. First of all, it's a really good way to make sense of all of the disparate movements that we've suffered from. And I think that they're really not that mysterious, when you really stand back and stare at them. They are all ways of developing psychological control. So when you have, like, even Marxism, and you say, well, it's a worker's paradise awaits, but you have to give up political power to a tiny group
and freedom and everything else.
And then when you compare that to all of these different things, even like the nightclub's observation, right? The science. I mean, basically, it's all going to end up in applied and weaponized anthropology, where they're going to be able to use this science against the populations to be able to create conditions of inside the culture that enable them to have control. Now, why are they doing this? Well, they want control, and also they want genocide. I mean, they're going to reduce population dramatically. I mean, this is a group that has an ancient agenda. I mean, how far back it goes we can discuss, but just looking through your material, you can see it's certainly hundreds of years old.
Well, you know, and DeFall in the chat just pointed out, and it's in your paper as well, Jason. Franklin School was connected to the cult of Dionysus. Would you like to talk about, you know, your discoveries and its relation to Dionysus, and even Dion? You pointed out in your article somebody had changed their name to Dion in connection to the Dionysian cult.
Yeah, wasn't that Bingham? Was it the Dion guy? He was a Crowleyite. I remember that. But yeah, I need a less specific information-based question. Otherwise,
we need to get you set up with a brain database so you can find it quickly and go through it. Well, that's okay. Go ahead, and or are you still looking for it?
No, I'm not going to look for it now because we're running out of time, right? But
we have 10 minutes left.
Yeah. I know what I was going to say. This doesn't answer the question, or maybe it does, the long way around. But the other thing that I think is really essential to keep in mind, and what certainly I always bring what I do back to, is that the social control we're talking about, it works. It doesn't work from the top down, I don't think. It works from the inside out. And this speaks back to the point I was just making, which is that behind the agendas, the methodologies, even the philosophies, it's like there's a set of values that I think have been created based on psychological principles. There's a deep understanding of psychology and crowd psychology that if these buttons are pushed, people will behave in this way. So then there's a set of values that are created that will make us in this way manipulable, will kind of instill in us buttons that can be pushed. And then the culture and then the movements are created that will push those buttons. But this proceeds in a much more subtle way, because the culture is being created by us to a large extent. So what even though that seems to kind of refute everything we're doing, which is about, we'll look at these social engineers, they're controlling everything we do. But the way that they're able to do that, and this is at least what I have to see about myself, is that if they create the kind of values that create the society that we're born into, including, of course, the education system and all the rest of it, and the entertainment media, then we'll get incepted and embedded with these values from day one. And then we become carriers to these values. And then we create the culture that perpetuates those values.
Absolutely.
So what I have to look at time and time again is my own complicity with this, that the real...
Well, it's like you and I were saying, we were discussing at the beginning of the show how you and I both drank the Kool-Aid, right? Joe drank the Kool-Aid too. So we all perpetuated that. And, when I started this show, it was perpetuating that. And then I interviewed so many of the world's leading psychedelic experts that it created a fishbowl effect. And, and I realized that I was looking at the intelligence community.
Right. And so, because I've been looking a lot into MK Ultra, of course, as you have, you can't avoid it. It's right there at the sticky center of things. But part of the way I've had to look at it, and very distressingly, is possibly I don't think I was a subject of MK Ultra directly, but let's say again of these philosophies and methodologies and practices that are written large with MK Ultra, that I was born into something like that. And so, to some extent, I may even be, I know I'm fragmented psychologically, but I may even be multiple to some extent. Like, I don't think I actually have a secret life as an assassin, but I did write books that were unintentionally promoting values that I now see as very harmful. So
wouldn't that be the case for
small example.
culture?
Huh?
Wouldn't that be the case of everyone born into this culture?
I think that I think it's reached a state of the art level where, yeah, we're all being sort of psychically fragmented and engineered as sleeper agents for the culture. Absolutely. But I think it is a spectrum, and like finding out where one is on that spectrum is very essential in terms of the dangers of undermining what we're doing, and self-sabotaging. And so we're creating one thing with our left hand, and then we're unintentionally destroying or distorting it with our right.
I think it's the other way around, creating it with the right, and because the left-hand path is...
Fair enough. I'm a lefty though, so I gotta...
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So yeah, it's a real mindfuck. Obviously, I was hoping to come up with a more poetic term, but like walking a tightrope, or just the process of. I see it as a process of deconditioning myself through the research, rather than attempting to, wake other people up or present this information. So, hey, wake up, you're being controlled. We need to stop this. We need to change this. I feel as though, at least myself personally, I've been embedded with that ideology in a way that is a distortion of that anyway. Like the family I came from were all about social reform and social change. They were all about, rights and freedom and all that stuff. Maybe they were completely unwitting. I can't rule that out.
But it's almost irrelevant, because in back of it, whether or not they were witting, was an organization that was designing it for malevolent purposes. This is the truth. And so whether or not an individual is witting or not isn't really important. It's important just to understand the malevolence, understand how it has created culture, and then how the different aspects, the individuals inside culture, are manifesting the malevolent plan. I think that your process is really admirable. I'm just, delighted to have met you and to have been able to have read the paper. And I think you're going to wake up thousands of people who read that material, because it's so honest and it's so shocking in its clarity that I just can't imagine.
Well, and they just wrecked they literally wrecked your brother's life, pulling him into all this, Sabastian Horsley.
Yeah, he's the scorched earth there, and I think that's really a good point to end on, because an awareness of the actual effects that this has on human beings is
right.
The thing that grounds it all, and just
exposes the whole thing as a massive fraud, because in this supposed freedom that they're offering us is really the full demise, literally the fall of humanity.
Yeah, it has really tragic consequences. This insane desire to control and perfect everything. But as I say, we all have that in us. And actually, my brother, what I see is he was trying to get free of it, and he destroyed himself in the process. So in many ways, his life was actually very illuminating for me, and for anyone who can see it for what it is, which is...
if you could... say, something to the audience about what you've learned, or, the message from your brother to the future, what would it be as we wrap it up here?
Well, it's obviously a very tall order, and not to fall back on a platitude, right? Because you can't say be yourself when you've been colonized with a whole false idea about what that is. Not to be afraid to be vulnerable, I think, really, because my brother's whole life was this attempt to build this fortress of identity to hide in. And the tragedy was the identity he built was the one he'd been programmed to believe was him. And so he ended up creating a prison. So the only way to avoid that, I think, is to be willing to be vulnerable, and to be seen, and to be unsafe, and to be powerless, and not chase after power, no matter what. It's not worth it.
Jason, your website?
Auticulture, that's AUTI culture.com.
And Joe, your website?
Hey, CaesarsMessiah.com. I really want to thank everyone who has sent me research tidbits. I've asked for help in a general sense in the last few shows, and the response has really been humbling. Thank everyone. And I wanted to just mention that tune in next week, because there is a chance that Jason will be back. We certainly hope he will be. And perhaps Steve Outram will also be here. That would be an extraordinary conversation.
Absolutely. And I want to thank everybody for all the research you send me every day as well. And thank you for all your donations and support. Please support the show. There's a donate button on the top of my website. And hopefully I got all the hackers out of there. I'll be working on that as soon as we click off here. And the site was shut down last night by hackers, furious for me exposing the trans agenda. So anyway, that's a wrap. And see you next week, Jason. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, Joe. Thanks, Jan.
All right,
Bye-bye.
and see you next week.